This is the Mental Podcast, and I am your host, Coach Matt Thomann. I'm a former athlete, teacher, coach, and athletic director that switched careers after surviving cancer and a stroke in the fall of 2020. And I'm also a dad of a son and a daughter that were successful high school athletes that went on to college. Now I use that experience along with my ICF coaching certification when helping teams, coaches, and athletes from all over the country. Each week, I will pose a specific question that will help coaches of all types better understand mental toughness. In the Mental Podcast, coaches will learn to help their athletes overcome adversity without being the adversity they need to overcome. Welcome back. Excited you are here, and I am ready to roll. Starting today with a series of basketball coaches that I'm interviewing about mental toughness on all sorts of different angles. And it's no surprise that I'm starting interviewing coaching basketball coaches. Basketball was my first love. It's my favorite sport. Played a little baseball as well. And of course, I love all sports. I'm a guy, I just pay attention to all sports, and I work with student athletes from all sports. But basketball is my thing, has always been my thing. It's my favorite. I was a second generation college basketball player. And when that's, the fact that, I was born in 1975. And my dad was born in 1948, the fact that, he played some basketball, where I was from in rural Southern Illinois, growing up on a farm, I was always amazed by the fact that my dad left home, went and got his college education and played basketball for those years. Not a big school, nothing fancy, but he went and played. And it wasn't necessarily the norm there. And he came back and took over the family farm. And that college degree wasn't, and that experience of playing basketball wasn't something he had to have, but he went and did it anyway. It's always meant so much to me that he did that it was that important to me. And then whenever I was a very successful high school basketball player in a small school, and then I found out that didn't necessarily equate at the college. I played college basketball. I loved it. I was successful in the sense that I enjoyed it, which I think that should be number one for everybody playing college basketball, because very, very few go to the pros. So you need to go enjoy it. Everybody wants to play. Everybody wants to win. But I accepted my role as a role player and enjoyed it. So I find that that's my definition of success, and something I try to instill into athletes that I work with, and knowing your role and that sort of thing. But I digress. My children both played a little bit of college basketball. My daughter just played a year, but she loved basketball in high school. And my son still plays at the Division II level and loves it. So basketball is and I also have a brother who just finished he just retired. I believe he played 12 years of professional basketball. So that's at our house, it is a number one sport. We like the other things, but it's all about basketball, and we love it. And of course, I spent time coaching basketball, and that is why a lot of these first interviews I'm going to do is coaching basketball coaches, or interviewing basketball coaches. And that's because that's the world. That's my network. That's the people I know, the people that I know that know people. They're basketball coaches. I'll dive into other sports at times, but that's what I know, and that's what I want to get into. And the very first guest I'm going to have on is a longtime friend of mine by the name of John Hughs. He's coached some basketball at various high schools through Illinois, and we got to know each other because we coached together and then in the same district. I'll mention it in the interview, but yeah, we just got to be very close friends because we had my science classroom was right next to the gym, and we both coached basketball, and we were both in the same program. So we would have lunch together every day and do our best to solve the problems of the world, and more importantly, the problems of basketball throughout the U.S. and but more importantly, our little district and what we needed to do there. And we really just had some great conversations. I learned so much, not just about sitting and drawing up plays, which we did that, but just the mentality of players, parents, coaches, what we needed to do better, how we could help our kids be better. So many conversations, and I know at various times we mentioned and laughed that this would make a good podcast, this lunchroom talk. And when John was one of the very first guys I called after I had my stroke, and I don't know if he remembers the call. I should ask him sometime, but it was a struggle for me with that being vulnerable. And he was one of the first guys I knew that it was okay for me to reach out to because I knew where his heart was, and I knew his passion, and knew he'd be willing to help me. And you'll see that passion in here in this interview. We're going to talk a lot about guys that, if you don't know John and I, and you don't know the school we were at in Deer Creek Mackinaw, these names won't mean much to you, but consider them to be examples of various athletes that you run across. You're going to hear us talk about various kids that had mental toughness, that needed to develop it, and how it showed and what the benefits were. And you're going to be able to apply that. And you're going to see the passion in John's voice and how much it meant to him and how much they meant to him. So pay attention, get what you want out of it. I think it's a great story and some great examples here. And also, John did coach my son for a while too. So it's just so many connections between he and I. We'll get done with the interview. Enjoy it. On the flip side, I'll break down some of the things and see talk about how we can, how you can use those things to apply them to, your coaching practice, and how you can use it to help your kids. So enjoy the interview. Calling all parents of athletes, I have some exciting news. Get ready to help your young athletes develop mental toughness this summer. Join me in a free webinar on developing mental toughness in young athletes. You'll gain valuable insights to help your athlete enjoy summer athletics while building mental toughness. And the kids are welcome too. And also, don't miss the interactive Q&A session for some personalized guidance. So mark your calendars for June 13th at 8:00 p.m. Central Time. Empower your young athlete and gain practical tips for the entire family. So join me in helping your athlete thrive and register today. I truly hope to see you there. The Mental Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Quick Cut. Quick Cut is the new alternative to Huddle. It's no secret why Quick Cut is the fastest growing platform in the country. Their video analysis platform has everything you need. Plus, you'll get triple the storage at about half the price. And now get even more when you use the promo code 50hours for 50 hours of free video storage. Make the switch. You'll be glad you did. Visit quickcut.com today. Today's question on the Mental Podcast is how to develop a defensive mindset in an offensive world. And my guest today is a longtime friend and basketball coach, John Hughs. He has, we worked together in the sense that I was the junior high, one of my first early jobs, I was a junior high coach while he was the high school coach for a program. And, it'll feel very normal for us to sit here and talk basketball because we did that every day in my classroom over lunch. And the reason I brought him here on today with this specific question is I was in the district when he came in and became the head high school coach, and I watched him take a struggling program to a winning program, and he did it primarily with defense. And I know that he did it with defense because the same kids that he had, I had coached in junior high, and I know that you were only going to do it with defense with those guys. So to see that he was able to get a program that was very much defensive mindset, because that is, and to do that in today's culture, in today's basketball, when it's, kids go out to the driveway, they're practicing, shooting and things like that. But defense is, it's important. Coaches know they're important, but it's the building it. So I wanted to see that. And full disclosure, John also coached my son for a while. And by definition, my son, you would definitely classify him as an offensive player first, and John got him to play some defense as well. So that's why I got Coach Hughs here to answer our question, which is how to develop a defensive mindset in an offensive world. So that's our first question, Coach. What's on your mind?
Full disclosure, when I coached Lane Tillman, first of all, he was a 5'6" freshman, and not exactly an offensive threat. He still may have been one of our best offensive players, a guy that was hungry to play and was looking to get on the floor any way he could. And when I was kind of prepping my notes for this podcast, that's one of my two favorite plays in my time at DMAC in the 5 years I was there, 4 years, was Lane, a 5'6" freshman that broke up a lob on an out of bounds play because he was just that's the kind of kid he was. So full disclosure, I didn't get to coach the offensive minded Lane Tillman. I may have cut him loose a little bit more, but as you mentioned this afternoon, you shot me the text, and it's an honor to be here, first of all. And like I said, I reciprocate all those things. Matt helped me build a great thing at DMAC. One of the things I'm most proud of in my life is kind of what we did with the program there. And we did. And as I thought about it, we built it in a culture of highlight reels through Snapchat and Instagram and everything else. We took a bunch of guys and made them do what I think is one of the most unselfish acts in the game of basketball, play defense and sold out for each other. And I'm certainly proud of that. And as I was reflecting on kind of some of the things that I talked about and we focused on, I think you build the culture you want by investing in young people. If you were only come to a few of our games throughout the year, I think most people would see that I am very difficult probably to play for. I think my players would kind of see that too. But I also know that the guys I coached and was the most hard on, I knew they could do that because I'd poured into them as people. I knew about their families. I knew about them outside of it. I knew when they're having issues off the court with girls or parents or whatever it may be. And I think when you pour into young people and you really truly love them, I think they'll go to bat for you. And I think you can raise expectations and make things more difficult and more attainable that they never thought they could do.
Yeah, and I know that, like I said, we've been friends, so I've seen this and I know it firsthand. But when we talk about getting them to go to bat for you and what when you're building that defensive mindset, what is it that, like, first and foremost, like let's say day one of practice, it's like, I know that I have to get this team defensively ready. What's the mindset that you have to have?
From day one, we had a few non-negotiables that we called non-negotiables. We were gonna play what we called DMAC hard, or wherever we are. It was Illini West hard when I was there, and that was one of our purposes. I remember one of the very first open gyms I was at was I stopped it and said, "Hey, we're not going to do it this way here anymore. We can make mistakes, but we're going to do them with effort and intensity, and we're going to do them that way." So I think that expectation, setting that expectation early, is important. And then we have a few credos, and I've even taken a few from the new program I'm in, and kind of you set the culture every day as the leader of your program and the expectations. And we made it a purpose to talk about defense and how we were going to win games. And I thought with a group of guys. And then the easiest way to build a program back to winning from a difficult stage it may have been in would be through defense. It doesn't take near as long to develop the skill, but you can develop a little bit of heart and intensity in defense. And we talk about it every day. We talk day one about defense is in our DNA. And we still do that to the day with the program I'm in now at Normal Community, a 4A program where I'm lucky enough to help out with. So I think it's the things you stress, how you practice, and the expectations throughout your practice. I talked to one of my, John Moss, one of my old assistants, and after I left, because you're always trying to get better and you're always trying to reflect and look at things you can improve, and that things don't always go the way you want them to do all the time in life and in coaching and in any profession. But I think anybody that's wants to be good is always retroflective, I guess. And John said that the one thing that we did was we held kids to a really high standard. And we were relentless in the fact that we expected them to play defense. We could live with turnovers, we could live with missed shots, some of those things, but we wanted them to sell out for each other on the defensive end. And we expected them to play really, really hard. And to be quite honest, it's something I'm most proud of. But I got to say, the kids in the school I was at, DMAC at the time, was a perfect fit for me. We had kids that were hungry to win, families that wanted to win and were supportive and allowed me to coach their kids. So,
yeah, I think that you're really talking a lot about the buy-in and making the culture and things like that. And it's one of those things that we know when we have it, it's great. And that's what we got to have. But how do you, when you came in, it wasn't that way, right? So when you're talking about building this trust and this culture and also holding them to a high standard, how do you mix those together?
Well, honestly, I knew, and for any young coach that's taking something over that you may want to change the culture, the first year may be difficult, and probably the first year and a half for me we're really trying it there. And had I not had people like you and John Moss and Mitch Holmgren in my corner at that time, I may have wavered. But we had to go through some growing pains, to be honest with you. We had our non-negotiables. We were going to be unselfish. We were going to play hard, and we were going to play for each other and represent the program in the right way. And those were things that I was unwavering on, regardless of points, assists, status in the community. So unfortunately, through some of those things, we had some really difficult times in our first year. I remember we won our last game at home, and just to put a point on where we were, my assistant was so excited because he said we weren't going to lose 20 games that year. We couldn't lose 20. So, and we had several kids that quit, probably for better for them and me. And you try to find the kids that are willing to, that fit your culture and are willing, if they don't fit, or at least willing to work and listen and learn and want to be involved in something that's bigger than themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question there is, as I look at it from this perspective, and when I work with athletes, and I work with a lot of athletes at different levels and things like that, and see a lot of perspectives, how do you find that mix between, the sport is for the athletes and you want them to do it, but we also, as coaches, know that they're really not getting the benefit from it if they're not doing it right. And invariably you have kids, attrition, that don't want to put the work in, and it does make your team better sometimes. But how do you justify, or how do you figure out where that line is between, that expectation and holding them accountable, but then doing it so much that kids don't want to play anymore?
Couple things. I knew that I had the right kids in my corner. So I knew the makeup of the kids that were in my corner. There were some young kids who were freshmen and sophomores, and I knew the makeups of their families. So I knew kind of the older kids, they were seniors. It's really hard to get them to buy in. I did have a senior that really bought in. And then, sometimes I think coaching, as adults and even teachers and spouses, and we steer away from difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And I personally, I want somebody that's going to be, I want people in my life. It's Alan Stein's book, Raise Your Game. I want somebody who's going to be truth tellers. I think the best relationships I have are people that tell me the truth.
It's funny you say that, and I can remember a phrase that you would say. I would hear you at practices, and you would tell kids. Kids would complain about playing time or situations, and I can remember you looking at a kid and saying, "I'm giving you the keys to the castle. I'm telling you exactly what it's going to take to play for me. You're just not wanting to do it." And I just that obviously that was years ago, and that has stuck with me as something that you said. I don't even know if you remember saying it or if that's.
I do now. I didn't, but I do now. But yeah, and you have to be really intentional. That you talk about culture, you have to be really intentional about what you're doing. I think kids these days don't get enough credit for, they're more informed. They're more probably intelligent than we were. We just kind of went aimlessly through our lives. Kids now want to know what's in it for them. And they also want to know what's the why. What am I going to get from, why am I going to do this? So you try to sell them on your vision and hope that your vision leads them in the right direction. And fortunately for us at DMAC, it did.
So how do you sell a kid that it's in his best interest? I can remember a kid you had, John Carnicle, is one of the smallest basketball players I've ever seen, and will get how do you convince him that he needs to go out there and have some 225-pound center run him over with taking a charge, right? How do you convince him that that's what's in it for him, right?
That's lucky for me, John Carnicle, the first my first encounter with John Carnicle was an 8th grader coming to our first high school open gym. And like you said, I don't know. I don't want, John, if you're listening, I don't want to cut you short, but John was probably 4'11" and weighed 125 pounds in 8th grade.
That's fair.
And we did not have enough people to play at open gym. So the junior high kids came over, and fortunate for us, we had guys like you down there that pushed them that way. And I stopped. That was the first time I stopped him. I said, "Hey, we're not going to do it this way." And a senior had hit a couple threes. Their senior star running back had hit a couple threes, and I stopped him and I said, "Somebody's got to guard him." And John looked over at me and said, "Do you want me to take him out?" And from that point on, I knew I could ask John Carnicle to do kind of whatever I wanted. But then again, John, like you said, John was a small, and I saw him about 2 months ago, and he's not small anymore. So, but he was small, and he was quick, but he wasn't overly skilled. So like you said, I'm going to give kids like that an opportunity to play at a small school, but here's the stipulations you have to do. And it meant enough to John Carnicle. You have to dive. You have to take charges. You have to be one of the toughest guys on the floor, probably guard inline to inline and not shoot very much. So John was willing to do that. And then, when guys like that, I don't think they get celebrated enough. You talk about guys that you watch the NBA, and they never talk about defensive players hardly at all. We celebrated those guys, and we celebrated charges, and we celebrated dives, and we're very intentional about tracking that stuff because it meant something to us. So I think all of that plays into your culture.
Yeah, I think that the way I do think that the way you track those things, you grow, you excel at what you celebrate a little bit. So when you celebrate those things, that's what the kids are going to really try to gain with. Do you have any examples so we're talking about developing a defensive mindset. So John was probably the terrible example because like you said, he'd take a bullet for you, but give me the kid that doesn't come to you ready to do, you say jump, he says how high. How do you develop that mindset in a kid that really isn't ready to?
I'm looking on the wall right now at the picture the guys got me from the Elite Eight team, and there's one kid's number 12, Caden Slack, and Caden was a sophomore. He's on the sophomore team, and I'll never forget it to this day. Man, he was just a dog on defense in the sophomore games. And, but he could score. He's really athletic. And I knew he's a key kind of cog to what we were going to build in the future. And we needed him. And Coach Moss and I pulled him in at halftime of one of the sophomore games before he got in the other guys. And we just said, hey, you're not playing defense. And his comment was, I can play offense or I can play defense. I can't do both. Which one do you want? So, and our sophomore coach was a little bit different at the time and didn't have the same expectations that we did. So he was kind of skating by and playing time and things like that. And so a kid like that, I spent a lot of time with Caden in the weight room talking to him about why we need you to do this. I talked to him at football games. I was visual at football games and his other sports that he did. I tried to be there for him and just continue to pour into him. And I think before his junior year, he wasn't going to go out for basketball. And I'd heard through the grapevine, there's a couple other kids that may not go out. And so I just pulled him in. I have a lot of one-on-one conversations with kids. Pulled him in and said, hey, listen, I understand where you're coming from. And I think as adults, I think we need to do a good job of listening to kids. I let him talk and let him get some things off his chest that kind of he didn't like. And I admitted some imperfections. I think being vulnerable and being able to admit mistakes in those intimate positions with kids is important to them. And I said, hey, here's the things we can do better, but I see you as a big part of the future. And here's the things we need you to do. And I'm going to pour into you for that. And to this day, Caden and I still text regularly and have a great relationship. And he's just re-upped in the Marines. So I'm super proud of him. And he's done a great thing.
He is a definite example of a kid that you could see if you knew him, the progress in. He is a poster child for a kid of developing mental toughness as he progressed throughout his career, because I do think some coaches out there think that you can't, you can only play the hand you're dealt. These are the kids that came to me and they're just not tough and I can't do much with it. But it takes time and it takes effort, and you can actually develop some of those things. So, and what I'm picking up from you, and I kind of know this already about you, but the relationships are just so key. It's like the relationships come first and then the effort, they'll get the effort. It's not, not the other way around. So think about that question or think about that thought for a minute. Let me pay some bills here. Calling all parents of athletes, I have some exciting news. Get ready to help your young athletes develop mental toughness this summer. Join me in a free webinar on developing mental toughness in young athletes. You'll gain valuable insights to help your athlete enjoy summer athletics while building mental toughness. And the kids are welcome too. And also, don't miss the interactive Q&A session for some personalized guidance. So mark your calendars for June 13th at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Time. Empower your young athlete and gain practical tips for the entire family. So join me in helping your athlete thrive and register today. I truly hope to see you there. The Mental Podcast is brought to you by our friends at QuickCut. QuickCut is the new alternative to Huddle. It's no secret why QuickCut is the fastest growing platform in the country. Their video analysis platform has everything you need. Plus, you'll get triple the storage at about half the price. And now get even more when you use the promo code 50hours for 50 hours of free video storage. Make the switch. You'll be glad you did. Visit quickcut.com today. So back at it here. My question was what thoughts you have about developing the relationship and how important that is to getting the buy-in on something not fun like defense.
I think it's everything. Like you said, the culture we live in is not one that celebrates role guys or celebrates dirty work or the guys doing those things. So it's in order to get kids to do those things, I think you 100% have to be willing to pour into them and develop relationships. And when I say relationships, I think it's really important for coaches talk. I think we're often in mentor-mentee relationships, but I learned a lot of things from the kids I coached. And listened. And you know what? I got to be honest, I messed up a lot too when I coached. But if you have those relationships, and we talked a great deal about family, and I grew up in a family of four. My brothers and sisters were awful close to me, and we played a lot of sports. And we talked about several times throughout our lives. My brother and I ended up in fistfights. But then we went inside and we loved each other. And you know, when you're competing and you're doing those things hard and you love somebody and you're passionate about something, there's going to be emotions that kind of spill over at times from me and from them. And you just got to kind of understand that. And I think that's kind of where I lived as a coach. I like the emotional part. I like guys to be emotional. I like people just as a general person. I like people. I like to pour into people. I like relationships. And I think just the kids was another way for me to expand on kind of who I am as a human being and kind of what I hope my purpose is life that kind of God give me.
No, and the passion there is, I can hear it in your voice now as we talk about it. You know, the passion's there, and I think that's key. I loved what you said about the vulnerability and admitting your mistakes. I think that's probably some great advice for a lot of young coaches. That we probably all had coaches that wouldn't admit to anything, and it was my way or the highway, and always right. And that's tough. So. A question that I had for you on the defensive mindset. I have the good memory of you basically switching gears on what type of defense you were. You was about 2 or 3 years in, right?
Yeah.
You decided, hey, we're going to switch defensive strategies. It fit my personnel. When you do that sort of stuff, what do you keep? What is again, the non-negotiables? And then how do you change a defensive strategy on a team from one year to the next?
Well, I've done it a couple times throughout my career. And the first thing I've always done is I solicit the help of somebody that's way smarter than me. That's got a lot of credibility within the profession. So I was fortunate to have Tom Wiersbe, who, growing up, I played in the same conference as him and his teams. I'll never forget it. We drove into Farmington when I was a senior, and they played 26 games, and the bank on the 8-city sign said, "Congratulations, Farmers, 27-0 on a perfect season." I scored the first 2 points. We were fired up and ready to go get the Farmers, and they scored the next 37. So I remembered playing against it and how miserable it was. And he was retired, and we developed a mutual relationship through coaching. And so the first thing I did was I brought him in, bring somebody that kind of knows. And
for those that don't know, he's talking about a jump and run that was and it was a full court jump and run. And I don't know if we need to get into it now, but and you can correct me when I'm wrong here, but it required so much of your guys.
Yeah. And that's it was, I 100% honest. I cannot thank those guys enough because what we did was so difficult. I mean, we got to the point where made or missed basket, we were guarding you from inline to inline, and not just guarding you, we were making your life miserable. And it took some time to get there. And then, you know, I remember that summer as we were kind of building it, and my best player was Levi Sherman at the time. And I talked to him about 2 days in, you know, like you said, talking to guys about things. And I was like, how do you like it? And he's like, I got to run all over the place. I'm playing hard all the time. I don't like it at all. So then I kind of talked to him and said, hey, you know, you got to tell him your point of view and what your why is. And I said, Levi, here's the deal. Like, we're going to put you on the front end of the press, and it's going to allow you to get some easy baskets up there. It's going to allow us to create some offense from our defense. And like you said, we could not score. We were not great at it. And then we talked about how it would make his teammates better if he kind of did some of that stuff. And I think if you get your best player to buy in, then I think the other guys are more likely to follow.
I mean, and eventually it came around for him because if memory serves, he dropped 35 one night, and a lot of it was off of, you know, those, half of it was off steals, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that's an easy way to win your best player around is, you know, kids love the defense, but the name gets in the paper with when you drop 35, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And he's another kid who, you coached him in junior high. He might be the only player that I ever coached that was more stubborn than I was. And that's a credit to him. But I remember when he was a freshman, he practiced with us in the varsity, and we didn't want guys to block shots. And it was about the 10th time that day Levi blocked a shot. And not only did he block a jump shot, he blocked it, and then he yelled and did a couple other things, and he told the guy how weak he was on the way down. So we stopped him when we ran, and, you know, we ran Levi for I don't know. That day it was the 10 minutes, and then he came back, and it wasn't hard running. He was just jogging around the outside, and he came back, and I said, do you know why you're running? And he wouldn't admit it. He knew. He was a really smart kid. He knew. So he just kept running. He ran for like 35 minutes that day around the outside.
Yeah.
And we talked I don't know, at his brother's wedding here last year, and he said that was way easier than practice was. So he was getting the better end of the deal on that.
Yeah. And that brings up so I'd love some perspective on that now that doing it again. Like, I don't think that the running did what you thought it did, right?
No, and that's one of those situations where you talk about, like, you get dug into a rut, and it's like I was my first year, and I was trying to prove a point, and it was his first year, and he was trying to prove a point, and the only thing we did was waste about 35 minutes of his practice time, and in the process probably made me a little bit angrier for all his teammates. So I don't know. I got to be honest. Eventually, it took 3 years, but eventually Levi bought in, and on our sectional, our run to the Elite Eight that year, I remember him. We were getting ready to play Williamsville before the sectional title, and the Mitchell kid had killed us at Christmas time for Williamsville, and he's averaging around 20. And we went through the scout, and I said, we got to limit him. And Levi stood up and said, hey, I got Mitchell. He won't score over 10. And I'll be danged if that night Mitchell had 6 points, a technical. Levi took a charge on one of their big guys, and so it can happen. You're right though. That practice when he was a freshman, I probably wasted 30 minutes of my life.
Yeah,
a lot of energy.
Yeah, and I think if you hadn't followed it up with some of that, like you're hard on them, but then loving on them, and then also talking to them about the why and really having conversations with them, I think that you don't. you don't make the progress that you do with kids. So kudos to you on that one. And we all make mistakes, but then you follow it up. So I'm curious, early on, you mentioned a couple of your favorite defensive plays ever, and you named one of them. What's the other one?
It was in the sectional finals against West Hancock, and it was in like the first quarter. They were 27-1 that year, and the number 2 team in the state. And Caden Slack tipped the ball in a run and jump in the full court, and there was a ball that was tipped, and Neil Sherman, the senior point guard, was not in the picture on film and came into the picture on film and dove from about 8 feet away and won the loose ball. And it was just a embodiment of who we wanted to be as a program. And John Moss and I probably watched that clip probably, I don't know, 25 times the next day, and just we're so excited about the buy-in and the toughness of our kids at that point in time. It was just such a fun thing to witness and see. And like you said, if you can ever get a group of kids in this society to sell out for each other and do hard things like dive on the floor, play defense, then it's such a reward to them, and it's such a reward to you as a coach when you see the whole process play through.
Yeah, it was so much fun to watch, being a fan at that point, and watching, being in the program, but getting to watch it. So, we'll just go last question here. When we're talking about developing that defensive mindset for whatever program you've got, whatever the age, what advice do you have for any young coaches trying to come in and develop a defensive minded team?
Have your non-negotiables, things that you think you cannot get away with, cannot get away from, and things that you want your program to be known for. Be genuine, be who you are as a person. Kids can tell when people are false representatives of themselves. And invest in kids. Invest in kids off the court, invest in kids on the court, but invest in their lives and pour into them to make them better people and hopefully make society a better place. And if we can develop some more unselfish people that are willing to play defense, I think we're all going to be a lot better off.
Yeah, doing people that are willing to do the dirty work it benefits all of us. So I can't thank you enough, John. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show, and maybe we'll find another topic and chat again sometime. So
sounds awesome, man. Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
You bet. Thanks, man. Creating strategy is great, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. Negative cultures can bring down a group in a hurry, and culture has to be addressed at the individual level. And as a speaker, I cannot remove obstacles from your life. However, I can help you learn to live your 100 and face those obstacles with a smile. The Live Your 100 presentation works great for schools, teams, and businesses. Find my email below in the show notes to start a conversation today about how I can come and speak to your group. Coaches, empower your athletes to overcome adversity with the Mettle Academy. Teach them to face and conquer hardship without adding extra pressure. Visit the link in the show notes and enter the code METTLE, that's METTLE, at checkout for a special listener discount. So Coach Hughs, as I mentioned, was a good friend of mine, but also one of the most passionate coaches I'd ever been around, I've ever seen. And one of the coaches that demands the most out of his kids. My son played for him, as I mentioned, and has played for several coaches now, and will tell you that that was John ran the hardest practices he's ever been around. And I think that if we just talked about how hard of a practice he ran, you miss so much of what Coach Hughs was about. The two words that really come up for me is passion, which I mentioned, but the other one's vulnerability. And in today's day and age, I think that's really important. I think some of the old school mentality about vulnerability in coaches and, quite honestly, men, is that vulnerability is something that's frowned upon, and you got to throw up the wall, got to be the suit of armor and just not let anything in and not let anybody see your weaknesses. And as you mentioned, John would have conversations with his kids in which he would admit wrongdoing and change his philosophy based on how it was making the kids feel and how it was going to affect the kids. Now, as we talked about in the interview, there were non-negotiables, and being vulnerable and changing your mind does not mean that you move, just move with the wind, that you're not a weather vane up there, that, you don't bow to anyone. You stick with your beliefs and what you want, but what you change is maybe the way you do it. You take input, you take criticism, even from the players. I think that a lot of time coaches really believe that they are there to lead, but see that as a very forceful leader, almost a dictator type individual, which was quite common back in the old days of basketball. My way or the highway type coaching. And if you don't like it, there's the door. Lose a lot of kids, and it still happens. Some kids aren't even okay with your non-negotiables. Some of the non-negotiables, like on hard work, and we talked a lot about defense with Coach Hughs there, and it was defense first with those kids, and that was the way he preached. That's the way he coached, and that's hard, right? And that's difficult. So some kids weren't okay with the non-negotiables, and they either didn't play or they didn't, even on the team. But how he adjusted those non-negotiables by talking to kids and changing practices and even changing entire defensive strategies to fit the personalities and fit the abilities, that's okay. That's good. I think that sort of thing makes a difference on how you operate and how you have success in different ways. What I really want coaches, especially young coaches, or, even not even young, if you are modeling yourself, we become the coaches that we were coached by. And I think that we need to stop and think about how we were coached and pick out the good, pick out the bad, and pick what we want and use it, but then realize what's antiquated and what's not useful. I think a lot of that is the vulnerability and actually talking to kids, building the relationships is just vital. You're asking your kids to be extremely vulnerable all the time. Every time you make them learn something new, they have to be, we all remember what it was like to play. It's vulnerable to get out there to play in front of people and be the stress and the pressure that it's fun. Sure. We often, when we sit around and talk about the glory days, we remember the fun, but a lot of times we misremember the anxiety and the pressure and the vulnerability. I think that when a coach opens him or herself up to their players and say, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm working on this. Here's what I want to do different, or here's, what do you think we need to do different? What do you see? How can you help me? I think that opens that relationship, helps that mentality for that individual, for the entire team. It's something I definitely took away from Coach Hughs. I know that it was something that I always struggled with in my coaching career, was, having to be in charge meant thinking you had to have all the answers and not letting people see your weakness. Something I've really had to change in my own life with a lot of the changes I've made for my recovery and things like that. It's a longer story for a different time, but that vulnerability is key, and being okay with that vulnerability, it's something that really helps in the long run. So great conversation, and I'll be back next time with another coach. I've got a couple other good coaches. We're going to go down and talk to some more high school coaches. I've got some various college coaches to talk to, all about these same kind of ideas, just how they see it, how they apply it. I've got some Division I, Division II, and some other coaches lined up for guys, gals, coaches. It's going to be a good set of podcasts, all about that mental toughness and how it applies to basketball. So thanks again for joining me on the Mental Podcast. Until next time. Thanks again for listening to the Mental Podcast, produced by Coraggio Media, sponsored by QuickCut, a video management platform for every level of play, and by Mental Coaching, helping athletes learn to face adversity in a spirited and resilient way. The Mental Podcast is created each week to help players develop more mental toughness, and that is something that will help all of us. So help me out and like and share the Mental Podcast with your friends. Until next time, keep forging your metal.